Hello, and welcome back to Dave's America Flyer Trains. As the next step in the rebuild of 4611, the New York Central Freight Train, let's take a little bit deeper dive into the 630 Reading Caboose. Not only is a Caboose one of my favorite cars, but particularly these 630 Readings. This guy was in the A.C. Gilbert inventory from 1946 to 1952, approximately 7 years with maybe a gap in there. But in that 7 or less years, A.C. Gilbert actually came out with 8 variations of this thing, if you can believe that. Are they 8 different ways you can make a caboose? Well, apparently they did. This is really kind of a hybrid between a Type 5 and Type 6, according to Doyle, where it's basically a Type 5, but became part a Type 6, 630, because illumination was added, and hence this coloration in the windows is part of the window shading or diffuser that goes inside the body. This one was the first one without a plastic frame. This is a die-cast frame. You can see the toolbox hanging beneath it. And it was the first one that didn't have a plastic frame. And if you've ever worked on these or have one that has a plastic frame, you know they came in red and black plastic. I have the red plastic, one of the red plastic, which I understand from Doyle is more scarce. And they have some issues. And I'll touch on those issues when we get over and start talking about the 629 Missouri Pacific stock car that was also part of this CES and some of the dynamics of the plastic. And they probably, speaking of dynamics of the plastic, they probably put these die-cast frames, according to Doyle, to combat some of that warping that occurred in this early plastic generations of 1946 and 1947. Some of the odd things about this, and it occurs also in mine, is that the body is attached to the frame with flathead screws, and I don't find that very much in rolling stock at all. Usually they're pins, not rivets, pins. Rivets are closed on the other end, pins are not. But this one, like mine, has those flathead screws. Makes it easier to at least take those out. Doesn't make it any easier to separate the body from the chassis from a warped body. The customers has a little bit of plastic flashing around these two windows. Mine does too. Makes me believe they might have been made so close together with the same the same casting of plastic that they both had that flashing inside the windows. They are, as you know, characteristic that 1946 has warping or what's called plastic sink, where the plastic would sink down before it cooled. This one, not so much. You can tell right here that that is the injection, the plastic injection point into the plastic mold right there, because that little hard little hump right there. And I'll show you mine in just a minute, which is a little bit worse. This has the thick shank, 1/4 inch, thick shank, unweighted couplers, which is kind of a characteristic of the 1947 version of these, or types of these, whereas the 46, early 46, would have probably had the thin shank, unweighted coupler. This one is just a great example. It has no chipping. It has no discoloration to the plastic. Both brake wheels are present on the fence, on both ends. You can see the brake wheel right there. No chipping on the corners. The steps are all there. It looks like I left a little dirt inside of those steps. No chipping here on these corners or here or on the walkway on the top. It's just a perfect, almost perfect place, not to mention the brilliancy of this lettering on the side. It does almost looks like it has never been handled. Mine, though, is a little bit different, and you can see it in just a moment. This one had cloth insulation wiring, so I don't really consider this a restoration, because I replaced that cloth, badly deteriorating cloth insulation wire with this 22 gauge flex wire that attaches to give either power or ground. I think this is power into the bulb bracket, which has been polished to remove quite a bit of rust pitting that was found on it. That was probably the worst thing about this one, was just the rust pitting. Now, in comparison, as a matter of fact, just to finish this now, it did have some minor rust. It had plenty of mold and mildew and dirt and dust, as you saw in the slideshow. and the interior paper diffuser was missing, and I'm assuming it should have been there because I haven't found many of these, if any, that don't have that paper diffuser. Now compare that to mine. I'm going to pull back just a little bit. This is mine from 4611, and you can immediately see a discoloration in mine that almost gives it kind of like, I call this maybe a shade of tomato basil soup, whereas this one is marinara sauce. It's deep red. It's the deep fire engine red. Notice that mine is almost has an orange or pinkish hue to it. Strange thing is that this discoloration goes as deep as the inside of the steps, and it's uniform all over the entire plastic, which would lead me to believe that this is not UV damage, either from interior or being in a window, because that would be uneven. This is even, which means maybe this is just the lot of paint that was used on this one gave it this. I've actually got another one that looks very similar to this, but it should be the identical Caboose to this. Now mine has a little bit more warping. It has a little bit more distinct sink right here from warping. It does have all the steps and no chipping, so they are very, very similar. So comparing like this how we'll do our benchmarking and then check up milestones. But this would be the first benchmark on the train, which is a milestone to compare these two cabooses. And they are so, so similar and even in very good condition. That's a thick shank coupler, 1/4 inch, and it is weightless. Does not have a weight. Very characteristic of 1947. Okay, that wraps up the Caboose, I think. Thanks again for watching Dave's American Flyer Trains. So long, everyone.